Hey everyone, so what I want to show you today is actually quite simple. It's something that I discovered, if you want to call it that, by accident, because I originally wanted to do something like this for Leo moves, it's called. And while working on it, I kind of discovered that something like this can look quite cool as well. And I want to show you how I did this, and you can experiment with this. I'll give you a few pointers that you can take with you to maybe take this to the next level. It's really basic, but still kind of cool. So before I started, I had these screenshots of different poses that kind of represent all the things that he's capable of doing. I guess today we could... No, actually, I just take the one that I was using already, which was this one. Just scale it up a little bit. It doesn't have to be perfect. There we go. Illustrator still has a thing that if you have to hold shift to scale it proportionally. And there we go, just put it there. And I locked this layer, maybe made it a little bit transparent. Which this, by the way, is my appearance panel. You can activate it by going here to window appearance, and then you can basically place it wherever you want to do. Very important to have because it's very handy. Yeah, there we go. And then just because of my workflow, I used, say this is the subject, and this is actually the layer I'm working on, working layer. Name your layers and so on, because at the end of the day, you will have a mess. And basically, you probably already guessed it, I just kind of divided his body into individual shapes. They don't really have to follow the actual human anatomy. But what I advise is not to make too many small pieces, and to maybe look a little bit, you see his muscles quite nicely, and also the shapes and so on, to kind of have this in mind when you start working. So let's say I'll make the first path, and I would say, I put a panel, for example, I don't know, here, like this. To keep the things clean, I take this one here off, so I have it actually transparent and see what's underneath it. And then go back to this. And now, very important, if I would click on this and try to, make another shape clearly adjacent, or, an anchor point right on top of this, but with a different shape, if I clicked on this, I would just delete it, as you can see with this little minus point. So if you hold down shift, you have this little star symbol there, and this means you create a complete new path, completely independent of what you're hovering above. So I can click on this anchor point and still draw a new layer. And I do something like this. There we go. And again, holding the shift button and going down here, and there we go. And then here I just follow this one here, make a triangle out of it, and here I make a little triangle out of it. And here I try to follow this one here. Maybe I want to divide this one up. It's also experimenting, it doesn't have to be perfect. But what's also really important, not to forget a shape. For example, this one here, even though it looked like, this is a finished shape, obviously this is just a result of these three, but it still has to be an individual shape. So you just fill it in. And like this, you keep going. Now with the hands, or let's say the smaller or more joints and muscles and like individually moving parts a body part has, I would divide it a little bit further into smaller pieces, and not make big planes out of it, because otherwise it just looks like he has gloves on or something. So that's just something that I noticed. And also exactly that the hand doesn't have to be realistic at all. Like, this is an abstract design. It doesn't have to follow any shading or any exactly biological correctness, if you want to call it this. This is anything but round or a ball or a circle. I mean, look at this. just something. But again, the good thing about this, you can always delete things, and so on and so on and so on. Nobody cares. This is literally a little bit of trial and error design. You can decide from the start a little bit if you want to divide it into something that is following more the logic of a human body, or if you want to have it completely abstract. I think both looks good. One takes a little bit more effort than the other one. Both take time and patience because it's not something you can just copy paste. You actually have to draw these shapes and so on. There's no automated process. I can imagine, if you actually divide a human being into planes that are actually used in 3D modeling and sculpting, it would look even cooler. But to be honest, I do not have this knowledge by heart. I would have to look it up, and I am too lazy to do that, so I don't. And you can always have a little check, see if something looks completely weird. I mean, what looks a little bit weird is his hand here, because in comparison to this one, it just looks like he doesn't have fingers here. Even though in the picture, we followed the path, but maybe you have to cheat a little bit here. Maybe picture, okay, what is this? Maybe his hand goes like this. Maybe we do something like this here. Yeah, I mean, this looks better than before. Before it just looks like he had a stump or something. What's also good to use as a guideline is kind of where the shadow changes. So for example, here you see that this is kind of in the shadow half, and here's like the highlights because of the shape of his body. One part is in shadow while the other one is lit. So you can also use this a little bit to guide your decision making in what shapes you want to adapt, basically. And here I go for more little shapes and not one big one, because of the perspective, his cough is going to be a little bit smaller, but it's still the front and the back part and so on. And even though these shapes are way smaller than his thigh up here, it's better to make this two shapes rather than one big one, so it stays the same size as this. But exactly, it's trial and error. Just try it out. Here we go for his joint here to add a little bit more detail here. And then the feet are a little bit weird because I always had trouble with hands and feet. And that's basically the foundation done, and we just turn this one here off, and you see that it looks something like this. Now I would select all of this and quickly go to the stroke and change the corners, because if you don't change the corners, you have these ugly little stars here. So if you tell Illustrator or the stroke options here that the corners should be different, you can either make them round, which I don't want to because everything becomes round. What I want is to just make them not sharp, because basically, let's say if you have a shape, right, okay, like this, and well, let's zoom in, then you see what it does to the corners, right? So it either makes it round, it makes it, I don't know what to call this, not sharp, and this one is like spiky. And for a design like this, I don't want it spiky, I don't want it round as well because it takes away the edge. I just want it like this. Now basically, what you do is pretty simple. You just select all of this. Now this is just the first method that you can use, and you can also make it more dynamic if you decide that it should be a little bit more impactful or something like this. So you go to transform, effect, then sort and transform, go to the transform option. And basically here you can say how the shapes that you selected should be transformed. So if I say I have preview selected here, so I can actually see what it does. If I say it should scale the shape horizontally, obviously when I decrease it, everything becomes smaller on the horizontal scale. So everything becomes thinner, as you can see. And same with the vertical thing, but what I want to do is to move it so that everything starts falling apart a little bit, I'd say. and maybe also change the angle a little bit, so you know they even become more disjointed. I don't want to go too crazy. Well, you can if you prefer this look, obviously, but then it just looks like, you know, everything is kind of shattered and scribbled. And I think if you want to go with a higher angle, you would have to go with a higher displacement. Otherwise, it's too overlapping. So instead, we just go a little bit back and we just change the angle a little bit. And then we just press OK. Now you see it didn't do much, but if you want to compare it to before, now here the appearance panel comes in really handy. If you select all of this and you just turn off the transform effect, which if you want to change it, you can click on this little button here, and it's, well, actually I think I have to click on this one exactly. You can redefine the changes that you already did, so it's a dynamic effect. But like this, you can also kind of swap between the before and after. So before it was actually just, you know, together, and then, well, actually I have to select it again. Then when I go with this one, it is disjointed, but with a certain kind of logic, which makes the whole thing a little bit more dynamic in my opinion. And then obviously if once you're done, I didn't do this with this design here. As you can see, there are overlapping parts here. But if you decided to, you could now expand all of this. Expand the appearance. So the effect is not dynamic anymore. The effect basically has been rendered. And to go back, you would actually have to go, you know, to undo the action with Control Z or Z or whatever you want to call this. But like this, you can now, you know, erase certain paths so they're not overlapping anymore. For example, this one, okay, let's say I want to erase these things here. You could be lazy and just, you know, choose this one here and erase the paths, which I don't like because it's not necessarily very clean. But if you're in a hurry and you feel like this is good enough for you, you can just do that. Or you can just decide that certain things have to be on top. So you can choose these two, right? Here they are. Now obviously, now you have a big mess here, which is kind of annoying, but like this, if you selected those two, you can see here on the layers panel which two they are. And you can now decide to just bring them to the front and fill them in with white, so you know they kind of erase what's behind. Now the next thing that you can do is, you know, if we go back and back and back and back to the point where the transform panel is actually deleted, and now you can distort these, you know, individually, and you give them a certain displacement, maybe make them a little bit bigger to make us feel as if they are closer to the camera. Move them horizontally and then vertically a little bit further up, right? And then choose the angle a little bit. So it shatters kind of like this. You can also choose where from, you know. Can kind of dismantle it any way you want, just for this part, right? And you have this one. And now maybe for the lower half, you kind of do something less drastic. And like this, you know, you can make it more disjointed. So individual parts, or let's say individual instances of the body, shatter differently. So the whole effect will have a little bit more extreme. And now, you know, if you want to be super, super, super proper with, instead of filling in the shapes and so on, you actually want to delete certain lines. Scissor tool here, if you click on it, it cuts it here, right? So I can just basically cut this part away and then delete it. And so on. Like, there are many ways you can get rid of this. And what you want to do, what you want to get rid of, is completely up to you. Also, if you want to, you know, maybe color all of these individual colors, you know, so you say on the left you want to have the highlights, maybe make them orange, and then in the middle you go for, I don't know, blue, and then for the shadow part you go for magenta, like a really dark magenta or something, to add some color to it. Completely up to you, and I think you will figure out ways how to use this effect to your advantage and for your styles and for your ideas. So yeah, I mean, it's not the craziest design ever made, but it's a cool effect that you can play around with. And as I said in my introduction video, I don't really want to explain functionality necessarily to you, but on the way I'll do it anyways. And these are the kinds of tutorials I want to make in the future, so if you enjoyed that, feel free to subscribe and to give me a thumbs up. If you have questions, just put them into the comment section, or message me on Instagram, or message me on TikTok. Well, on TikTok you have to be follow back. Well, I guess go on Instagram or on YouTube. It's the easiest way. And on TikTok I'll always do the little tutorials, so I will keep you posted there, and I'll post more tutorials about Illustrator, Photoshop, photography, anything that I'm doing to share it with you guys. Thank you very much for watching, and see you around.